It ain't hard to see. Niggas like that don't associate with me. I'd rather get busy to the third degree.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to yet another video. Today, we are going to do the top remaining free agents. This is not an all-inclusive list. There's only like 29 people on it, but I didn't want to make, an hour-long video just talking about unsigned guys. But there's really, really impactful players still available out there. So let's get right into it. Starting off, we'll start quarterback, running back, wide receiver, going down to the end of the defense. We got Carson Wentz here, and I am not going to use his 2022 stats for reference here because my little conspiracy is that I feel like the Commanders, I'm not trying to say that they were setting him up, but when he was out there, the talent around it, especially the blocking was just so non-existent for Carson Wentz when he was out there with the Commanders. I don't know. I feel like he got set up. They weren't playing as hard when he was out there. But look, man, if we're talking about that Colts Carson Wentz, right? Just look at the stats. And let's keep in mind now, that was a playoff team. They were 9-7, had a clear path to the playoffs, and then completely folded the last 2 weeks. Was that in part due to Carson? Yeah, in part. But if you look at the season as a whole, hey, I still think Carson Wentz is a starting caliber quarterback. He could start for several teams right now. The top three teams, if I had to say, I would say back to the Colts to compete with Anthony Richardson. The Buccaneers, if they don't love Baker Mayfield and if they're not trying to tank, or the Cardinals. I feel like the Cardinals is most likely because Kyler could be out. They could just decide to rest Kyler the entire season. And Carson Wentz, I mean, that's a pretty good guy to just bring in to start for you for a season. So that's where I think he could land. Next up, we got Matt Ryan. And I'll keep it real here. I think Matt's done. He's 38 years old, just coming off probably the worst season of his career. I mean, I'd have to look at his early seasons, but his worst season in a long, long time. He would have led the league in picks because he missed a lot of time near the end of the season. I mean, 13 picks is just, it's kind of sad. Matty Ice, I watched a lot of Falcons games growing up, still do now. To see him be reduced to this, it's kind of rough. The only two spots I could think of, the only role I could think of would be like a mentor to a younger QB. So I put the Texans and the Steelers there for CJ Stroud and Kenny Pickett, respectively. I don't think Matt Ryan, let me put it like this. I think he has won his last game in the NFL. If he ends up playing, I think it's going to be as a backup somewhere to finish a game out. I don't think Matt Ryan is winning any more games as a starter in the NFL. That's just my opinion. Getting into the running backs, though, we got Leonard Fournette. I'm not really sure why he's still out here. He did not look washed last season with the Buccaneers. I mean, their whole offense was pretty atrocious. I mean, he was used very much as a receiver. They couldn't really run the ball whatsoever, and I attribute that to their O-line and offensive coordinator because we all saw what Fournette could do in the playoffs and playoff Lenny on their Super Bowl run. So even though that 3.5 yards a carry is sticking out there, I think he's a lot better than his stats say. But even that, his stats, almost 1,200 total yards last season. He really emerged as a receiving back. Didn't fumble the ball, 6 touchdowns. He's still only 28, and 28 is that age. You'll see it here. A lot of running backs start to lose some of their spark. But I think Fournette still has several good years left in him. But you got to be realistic here. I think going back to the Bucks would be a good option. Obviously, the Cardinals have the worst running back room in football, and I think the Raiders behind Josh Jacobs as kind of a receiving option. I kind of like that. So those are some places I think, but I would be shocked if Fournette can't find a spot where he can produce, next season. The next up we got Zeke. Uh, 28 years old, 3.8 yards a carry. His first season of his career, I think, with under 1,000 total yards. That's because Pollard obviously took the job over and especially took over the receiving aspect of the Cowboys running back room. And for his possible landing spots, I got the Vegas Vipers, the Orlando Guardians, in the XFL. But yeah, let's be honest here. I think Zeke's done. Maybe a team will give him a shot as just a goal line back, but if he does do that, then he'll be down to like 2 yards a carry, 1.5 yards a carry. Look, 12 touchdowns to 0 fumbles, that is impressive. I can't even hate on that, especially considering Zeke's history with the fumbles. But I mean, it's just if you watch the Cowboys, he's done. He can't bust off the big runs like he used to. He has no explosiveness, and now he doesn't even have that receiving threat to him anymore. It's just he's just not talented enough to be a premier back in this league. And there's some people who still think he's top 10. That's bullshit. I mean, it's crazy how some delusional Zeke fans are still out there campaigning for him. But yeah, if you ask me, he's done. I don't think he's going to start another NFL game in his career. Next up, we got Kenyon Drake. He stepped in for the Ravens last season when they lost J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards for some time. And he was pretty solid. Look at the numbers. That was in very limited time. So I think going back to the Ravens would be a very good option for him. He's 29 years old. Kenyon Drake is a guy, I think he had 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons as far as like total yards are concerned. I don't know. Nobody really talks about that because I mean, 2 of those years were on the Cardinals, if I'm not mistaken, one on the Dolphins. He's a really underrated back in this league. So I think the Ravens would be a good spot, obviously returning to them. And I think the Broncos to kind of fill that Latavius Murray role. Obviously, Javonte Williams is coming back, but they still need a running back too, and I think Kenyon Drake could be a good option for them. Next up, we got Kareem Hunt. Man, such a sad story, but not really a sad story. He didn't really, it's not like he got kicked out of the NFL or anything, but Offensive Rookie of the Year, a monster on the Chiefs. Certainly would have won multiple Super Bowls with them, would have been a star, possibly a Hall of Fame trajectory, all cut short because he punted a bitch in the head. So, excuse me. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of sad. But, I still think he could provide some value to some teams. If you look at last season, it was a big down year. Probably the worst year of his career. Because even before this, he was a very good running back too on the Browns. They had that two-man punch going on. But I think the Cardinals, like I said, they just are in desperate need of talent at running back. And I think the Chargers, kind of as a foil to Austin Eckler, they kind of do similar things, but just as some necessary depth. And also, if Eckler is still going to be, whining about his contract situation, Kareem Hunt could actually put up some numbers there. So those are a couple spots I think for Hunt. Next up, we got Kenny. Let's talk about Kenny Galladay for a second. Obviously, the Giants parted ways with him. I don't get it. This is one of the most mysterious things I have ever seen in my time of watching sports. The man was a beast on the Lions, a deserved Pro Bowler, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, and I just don't really get what happened to him. But not Kenny Galladay, man. This is just another one of those things which make you think the Giants are just cursed as a franchise, man. Look at that, 6 catches, 91 yards, 1 touchdown. And it's not like he missed the whole season. He was out there a lot. I think he played like over 200 snaps. Over 200 snaps on offense, 6 catches. That is ridiculous. So obviously his position is a thief and, possible landing spots, we got the pod right there. I don't, man. This is career damaging, honestly. I don't know how any team could look at that and what went on in New York and said, "Oh yeah, we want this guy on our team." Even though, I mean, for like 3 years removed from him being a Pro Bowl receiver with Matt Stafford, and like I don't get it. We need like a 30 for 30 on Kenny Galladay's time with the Giants because this was honestly incredible. Next up, we got Jarvis Landry. This was interesting because I remember watching the Saints week 1 against the Falcons, and Landry was out there making plays. But then, I mean, I'm assuming it's injured. I think it was injuries. He missed some time. Jameis went down. You had Andy Dalton at quarterback. So it all just kind of fell apart in New Orleans. But still, I mean, he was very, very underrated with his time on the Browns. So I think he can regain some of that. Obviously, look at the stats last season, they weren't very impressive, but I think the Falcons could use him as kind of a slot guy. I think Dolphins as well would love I like that, the idea of him going back to Miami. And my Seahawks, just for some depth in case an injury took place, Jarvis Landry as your fourth receiver, I would like that a lot. So I think any team could use Jarvis Landry, to be honest, on their roster. And next up, Antonio Brown. Listen. I understand all the off the field issues. Me personally, I don't really blame him that much for how Tampa ended, because apparently there was some blame to be placed on both sides in that situation, right? I don't know. I feel like we saw him put it together, or keep it together, I should say, for a whole season, won a Super Bowl, was a big contributor on that team. People forget just how good he was in Tampa. But look, in his last 16 games, now keep in mind, I had to put these together over a span of 4 years. But his last 16 games, 91 catches, 1,084 yards, 9 touchdowns. He has the talent. The talent has never been the question. He's a first ballot Hall of Fame talent. But look, man, he is by far the best free agent wide receiver. It's not close. And the Titans, desperate need of weapons. If we're just talking about a team that needs receiver the most, it's the Titans. But then you got the Ravens. It looks like he wants to play there. I don't see the problem with it. Worst case scenario, you cut him. If things get bad, you cut him. But I think if he wants to play there, and I think him and Lamar have some type of connection, I don't see the issue in bringing AB on because he obviously is talented enough. Moving on to defense, I'm not going to do any offensive line because I just what stats am I going to talk about? What could I talk about for them? If you want to find out the best free agent lineman, just look it up. But here, moving on to the pass rushers, Yannick Ngakoue, one of the most consistent and underrated pass rushers in the league. I think the guy's put up at least like 8 sacks his entire career, right? He's 28 years old now. So, yeah, he's been a monster. Wherever he goes, he produces. I think it's been like 4 different teams now, possibly moving on to his fifth. And, I mean, just look at that last season, 9.5 sacks, 16 quarterback hits, only 732 snaps. That is not as much as you think it is. Like, the top guys are playing 900. And for him to only play 732 and put up those numbers, he's obviously a premier pass rusher. And he's probably looking for a big time contract because he deserves it. I mean, he's in his prime and he's shown that he can produce wherever. So for me, I think the Texans are the team in most need of pass rush. I think Yannick would help them more than anybody. But the Falcons as well, even though they've drafted multiple people, Ngakoue would obviously be their best edge rusher. And then the Chiefs, as a Frank Clark replacement, they've got a couple young guys as well, but obviously Yannick would be the veteran presence in there. So, look, any team, he could be the number 2 edge rusher. A lot of teams, he could be the number 1. But if he's looking for a payday, that throws a wrench into things, but I am patiently awaiting to see where he goes. Next up, we got Justin Houston. And I think, again, just not a guy. When I make my video about, career resurgences or guys who put together a very surprising season last year, Justin Houston's going to be on that list. 9.5 sacks, 17 quarterback hits. Please understand, this is one of the best seasons. This might have been like a top 5 season last year for Justin Houston, one of the most underrated pass rushers, of this generation. At 34 years old, and look at that, 397 snaps. The man got a quarterback hit on average like every 20, 23 snaps. That's pretty good. That's pretty solid. Man. So I think every team should be trying to call up Justin Houston. I think a return to the Ravens makes the most sense. That seems kind of likely. But also a return to the Chiefs. Like I said, they lost Frank Clark. They are looking for a guy to fill those shoes, a veteran presence there to also teach Karlaftis and Felix Anzarike, whatever. Hey man, everybody should be knocking on Justin Houston's door. That's all I'm saying. Then we got Dwayne Smoot from the Jaguars. He's kind of an inside-outside guy. The numbers aren't as flashy, 5 sacks, 12 QB hits, but I think a return to the Jags is very likely because they lost Arden Key, if I'm not mistaken. So I think they need to retain Smoot more than, it would benefit them to let him walk. But the Bears also, they signed DeMarcus Walker, but I think Dwayne Smoot adding, more pass rush, they are in desperate need of NFL players. And Dwayne Smoot would be a very good rotational pass rusher for them. Then we got Frank Clark. Sneakily, one of like the best playoff performers ever. I think he's like top 10 on the all-time playoff sacks list, which is kind of crazy, but it makes sense considering, how often he's in the playoffs. But I mean, 13 quarterback hits, 5 sacks, 39 tackles, 8 tackles for loss. It was a bit of a down year, but it's not. I mean, he is very still valuable. The Chiefs, I'm sure, would love to have him back. They released him, just because it was a massive cap hit, but that doesn't mean they couldn't bring him back on a cheaper deal. And then, like I said, the Bears in desperate need. Frank Clark, I've seen Bears fans already talking about, wanting Frank Clark on the roster. And then I think the Broncos, ever since they released Bradley Chubb, the second half of their season, their pass rush was not up to par. They drafted Drew Sanders, signed Zach Allen from the Cardinals, if I'm not mistaken, but still Frank Clark, and then possibly him helping them out in their games against the Chiefs. That could be, like an underlying reason they'd want to bring him in, but they could still use some help on the defensive line. So those are a couple options. Next up, we have Robert Quinn. I don't know what this might be like one of the biggest drop-offs I've ever seen. Last season, not this previous season, but last season, 18 and a half sacks, 22 QB hits. The man was all pro caliber 1 year ago, and then last season he had like 2 sacks. Now, he was traded midseason to the Eagles, which should have just been overpowered, but I don't know. Maybe it was just because of the level of talent around him. Hassan Reddick, they already had uh, Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham. He probably was the fourth best edge rusher on that team. But still, man, to go from 18 and a half sacks to two, I don't know what went on. But I think a return to the Bears, I mean, you'd have to be crazy, right, to not think that he could at least recoup some of 18 and a half sacks just a year later. But also the Ravens as a Justin Houston replacement, if you want to phrase it that way. But I cannot believe that a Robert Quinn who put up 18 and a half sacks in 2021 is just going to be completely washed and done by 2023. That makes no sense to me. Next up, we got Leonard Floyd. He was released by the Rams. Such a big part of their success these last couple years. Kind of an unsung hero. Aaron Donald gets all the credit. Last season, Bobby Wagner got most of the credit at that linebacker position. But Leonard Floyd was very, very good in his time with the Rams. Very consistent too. And he's coming off a very good season. 9 sacks, 22 QB hits. That's damn near Pro Bowl level numbers. Still 31 years old. I don't think age is really a concern for him. I think the Raiders would love to have him, as kind of a Chandler Jones replacement, only after 1 year, but I think still they desperately need pass rush. The Dolphins lost Melvin Ingram. Leonard Floyd would be an upgrade over him. Obviously joining Jalen Ramsey back there. And then, like I said, the Chiefs, I think they are in need of any type of veteran pass rush presence. So I think that would be a great spot too, if he wants to just continue to ring chase. Then we have Kaden Elliss. I had actually never heard of this guy, which is crazy because I've done so much research on all these breakout players from last season. I didn't even know that there was a guy on the Saints who put up 7 sacks last year. 28 years old, came in as a very, very experienced rookie, if you want to put it that way. His first 3 seasons had like 1 sack combined. And last season, he just popped off out of nowhere. 10 QB hits as well, 78 tackles as a whole. So he flew all around the field. Probably one of the better players for that Saints defense, honestly. So I'm sure they'd love to have him back. But also the Texans, to acquire a younger pass rusher, possibly for a long term, 3 or 4 years, I think that would make a lot of sense because besides Will, I'm not sure, like Will and Jerry Hughes, I'm not sure who's going to generate any pass rush on the Texans. So Kaden Elliss, I think those are 2 spots for him. I mentioned Melvin Ingram, Dolphins letting him walk. I mean, he fell off a cliff. The man was like, it was like 4 or 5 straight Pro Bowl caliber seasons, then done. Completely nothing. And then last season, I mean, he bounced back. I think he had like multiple games of not double digit sacks, but multiple sacks. I think it was the Bills game when Tua went down. He had like 2 sacks, and another one he had 2 sacks. It's just, he bounced back. Obviously 34 years old, 512 snaps. That's probably a lot. I don't think wherever he goes, he's going to play that often. But still, I have no doubt that Melvin Ingram could, make some big plays still. So I listed the Chiefs and the Ravens, 2 teams that need veteran pass rush. Watch out for Melvin Ingram. Then we have Marcus Golden. This might be the most QB hits I've seen by a guy with the least amount of sacks. And he's been a guy who's got sacks before, so I don't really understand, he got to the quarterback a lot, beat up a lot of quarterbacks, but couldn't finish it early enough to get a sack. So I'm not really sure what that's about, but one of the guys who's taking a mass exodus from the Cardinals. I mean, the Cardinals lost Marcus Golden, J.J. Watt, and Zach Allen all in one season and passed on Will Anderson. Their pass rush is going to suck. But I think a return to the Giants would be a smart move. He spent a little over a season with the Giants and had a really good year. Or, like I said, the Dolphins as a replacement for Melvin Ingram. I'm not sure why I haven't even heard of his name like yet in free agency. He had a really 20 QB hits. There are only a handful of guys who crack the 20 QB hits marker. So I'm sure he's generating a lot of interest, and we'll see where he ends up going. Next up, we got Kyle Van Noy. Before I even say anything, the Patriots have to be a possible landing spot. I mean, he's a Patriot through and through, even when he wasn't a Patriot. I mean, he was with Matt Patricia on the Lions, so he goes wherever Patriots coaches are, basically. But last season, a bit of a down. I mean, he kind of was a late bloomer in New England, and these last several years, he's been pretty consistent wherever he's been. He's not, a dominant pass rusher, but 5 sacks in limited playing time, 9 QB hits, 46 tackles. He's a valuable guy to have as a rotational edge rusher. So I put the Patriots obviously, but I think also the 49ers, they lost a lot of, sleeper good pass rushers. So I think Kyle Van Noy adding him into there would resolve some or make up for some of the loss you incurred over the offseason. Next up, we got Miles Jack as kind of the stand-up linebackers. Um, I think it was a first-round pick for the Jaguars, part of that Jacksonville defense. I don't know if they traded him or let him walk to the Steelers. But he went to the Steelers. I mean, 104 tackles in 692 snaps. That seems pretty good to me. Obviously, he's not great in coverage. He doesn't really get after the quarterback, so it's kind of like it's one of those things where you need a middle linebacker, but if he doesn't get after the quarterback, and he doesn't, defend the pass well, how good really is he? I think there's still value for guys like Miles Jack. I think the Steelers still need him. If they were just to let him walk and also lose Devin Bush to the Seahawks, I think that would be a really, really big hit to the Steelers linebacking core. So I think he most likely re-signs with the Steelers. But the Jets also, I think, CJ Mosley is getting up there. Miles Jack is only 28 years old. That could be a potential landing spot. Then we got Quan Alexander. He's leaving the Jets. 69 tackles, 6 tackles for a loss. He is really more of a get after it, stuff the run kind of a guy. Also a little better in coverage than Miles Jack, if I'm not mistaken. So I think if the Steelers didn't want to pay Miles Jack, maybe Quan Alexander is a cheaper alternative. And also I put a return to the Buccaneers, obviously, because Devin White is having issues with his contract or whatnot, so that could be an option. Next up, we're going to get into the DBs. First off, we got Marcus Peters, and man, obviously he was out all year last season with a major injury, came back, and he was just not his former self, man. 113 passer rating allowed. If you do not know, if you're over 100, it is bad. 113 is awful. He gave up 7 touchdowns in coverage last season. Only had 1 interception. The ball hawk, Marcus Peters, 1 interception to 7 touchdowns given up. That is very, very bad. Only 6 passes defended. He got picked on last season. But maybe coming off injury, we should cut him some slack. But I think it still makes sense for him to come back to Baltimore or go to a division rival in Cincinnati, who lost Trey Flowers, Eli Apple, Von Bell, Jesse Bates. So they need help in that secondary. A veteran presence, I think, would make a lot of difference there. So those are a couple spots. Like I just mentioned, Eli Apple, one of the most overhated players in the league. People will tell you Eli Apple is a straight bum, which is not true. I just showed you. Look, 20 passer rating points better than Marcus Peters. How many people would have known that? And before this season, he was even better than that. I mean, he was a sleeper good corner in the league. Not amazing, obviously. Not a ball hawk or anything like that, but he was solid. Last season, not as much. He was a little below average, but I think he can still play. Only 28 years old, 8 passes defended. He's solid. If he's your third or even a fourth corner, that is great depth to have. So I put the Falcons there, rejoining Jesse Bates, staying in Cincinnati, or going to the Ravens. They already got Rock Ya-Sin, so maybe corner is not as big of a need for them to get another guy, but those are a couple options. Next up, we got Casey Hayward. Only played 6 games last year due to injury. When he was out there, he was solid. Obviously, a much smaller sample size than some of these other guys, and he's also 34 years old, so maybe a big red flag. But an 80.7 passer rating allowed. Again, small sample size. That's very good. That is very, very good. And I think a return to the Falcons makes sense. Or the Bears. Their secondary kind of sucks. So I think those are a couple spots for Casey Hayward. Then we got Anthony Brown on the Cowboys. After signing Stephon Gilmore, I guess they just kicked Anthony Brown to the curb or to the curb, sorry. And he's another guy like Eli Apple that gets hated on a lot, but he gets he gets picked on out there. And he fights through it more times than not. I mean, obviously he gives up a lot of touchdowns, a lot of big plays, but an 89.7 passer rating allowed, considering how much he gets targeted and how many big plays he gives up, that's actually pretty solid. 7 passes defended as well. He is getting up there in age, 29 years old, but I mean, hey, I think the Steelers would love to have him after losing Cam Sutton. I think the Jaguars, after cutting Shaquille Griffin, are in need of a corner. So those are, I mean, any team could have Anthony Brown as their 3rd or 4th corner, I feel like. Moving on to the safeties now, we got Adrian Amos. I think most likely he goes back to the Packers, but if he does not, let's look at the season. Over 100 tackles, really a sneaky career year for Adrian Amos, even though he was pretty bad in coverage. But 7 tackles for a loss, 5 passes defended. He's not great, but he could start on a lot of teams. For example, the Bengals, after losing Von Bell and Jesse Bates. The Jets were pleading for a safety the entire draft, didn't really get one. So I think Amos could fill a role there and, as a LaMarcus Joyner replacement. Moving on to LaMarcus Joyner. He was really bad in coverage, even though he had 3 picks. So if you have 3 picks in coverage and you're still giving up a high rating, that just lets you know when you're not getting picks, you were pretty awful. But still had 6 passes defended, 57 tackles. He is not great, but if the Packers don't bring back Adrian Amos, this could be a cheaper replacement. Also, I think the Raiders making a return to Vegas. He played with the Raiders previously. So, he's not awful. I think he is, like I said, the 2nd best safety available, hell. So those are a couple spots for him. That is going to be it for this video. This is already long enough. Talked about like damn near 30 players. But I just wanted to give you an update on some of the best remaining talent out there yet to be signed. So leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I appreciate it. See you later.
It's out the motherfucking pack. Right out the niggas don't know how to act.